If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. This is your host, Bruce McGuire. Today, we're going into the infamous Casey Anthony case. This has been one of the most requested MINDSHOCK True Crime cases, and I'm finally getting to it. And on the surface, once again, this does not seem complicated. We have a known liar making statements that cannot be believed. We have just really damning circumstantial evidence, not reporting the death of a child, and by all accounts, there don't seem to be that many other good suspects. But was this an accidental death of her child? And should she have been found guilty? And again, what a lot of people don't know, at any trial, they're being found innocent or guilty of what they're being put on trial for, in this case, premeditated murder. So she could have still been responsible for the child's death and it not have been premeditated murder. And that's something that actually gets lost in the whole process because people are very emotional about serving justice, as they should be, but in terms of legal cases, logic and reason and scientific evidence should be the basis to determine the truth, not emotion. Emotion could dictate, of course, that justice should be served, but how it should be served and if evidence is valid or not are, of course, non-emotional issues. So we'll be diving deep into this case in typical MINDSHOCK fashion and examining all theories from all sides. As always, if you enjoyed the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Make sure your device allows those notifications to come through. If you're still not getting notifications, you can just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK and see all of the podcast episodes and series there. You can check us out Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case, topic, logical analyses, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, or debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And if you like this particular episode, hit that like button and share it across social media platforms. So, quick case breakdown, just for those who don't know. Obviously, this was one of the most heavily covered cases within the true crime sphere. There haven't been that many that have gotten this kind of coverage. Of course, we have OJ, JonBenet Ramsey, Scott Peterson, Chris Watts recently, but yeah, the Casey Anthony case was amongst the most profiled in media. So this case, of course, is centered around Caylee Anthony. And this is just the quick overview from the Wikipedia. Caylee Marie Anthony, born August 9th, 2005, died 2008. Date of death unknown. Last reported seen June 16th, 2008. Remains found December 11th, 2008. And in a lot of these cases, the window of time between the disappearance and the remains being found are, of course, problematic the longer the time goes on, because the time of death obviously is very difficult to determine the longer the period of time has transpired before the remains are found. Caylee Marie Anthony was an American girl who lived in Orlando, Florida with her mother, Casey Marie Anthony, and her maternal grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony. On July 15th, 2008, she was reported missing in a 911 call made by Cindy, who said she had not seen Caylee for 31 days and that Casey's car smelled like a dead body had been inside it. Cindy said Casey had given varied explanations as to Caylee's whereabouts before finally telling her that she had not seen Caylee for weeks. Casey lied to detectives, telling them Kaylee had been kidnapped by a nanny on June 9th and that she had been trying to find her too frightened to alert the authorities. She was charged with first-degree murder in October 2008 and pleaded not guilty. On December 11th, 2008, 2-year-old Kaylee's skeletal remains were found with a blanket inside a laundry bag in a wooded area near the Anthony family's house. Investigative reports and trial testimony varied between duct tape being found near the front of the skull and on the mouth of the skull. The medical examiner mentioned duct tape as one reason she ruled the death a homicide, but officially listed it as, quote, death by undetermined means, end quote. The trial lasted 6 weeks from May to July 2011. The prosecution sought the death penalty and alleged Casey wished to free herself from parental responsibilities and murdered her daughter by administering chloroform and applying duct tape. The defense team, led by Jose Baez, countered that the child had drowned accidentally in the family swimming pool on June 16th, 2008, and that George Anthony disposed of the body. The defense contended that Casey lied about this and other issues because of a dysfunctional upbringing, which they said included sexual abuse by her father. The defense did not present evidence as to how Kaylee died, nor evidence that Casey was sexually abused as a child, but challenged every piece of the prosecution's evidence, calling much of it fantasy forensics. It's a catchy term. Casey did not testify. On July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, and aggravated manslaughter of a child, but guilty of 4 misdemeanor counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer. With credit for time served, she was released on July 17th, 2011. A Florida appeals court overturned 2 of the misdemeanor convictions on January 25th, 2013. The not guilty murder verdict was greeted with public outrage and was both attacked and defended by media and legal commentators. Some complained the jury misunderstood the meaning of reasonable doubt, while others said the prosecution relied too heavily on the defendant's allegedly poor moral character because they had been unable to show conclusively how the victim had died. Time magazine described the case as the social media trial of the century. And we see this a lot of times in the media, and when they actually get the right person, I'm not talking about in this case, I'm talking about in other cases where there is a clear murder victim and a clear murderer with a mountain of physical evidence, the social media campaigns that run amok and character assassinate the person. That's all well and good, but the character assassination has nothing to do with whether or not the person killed somebody or not. Like, for example, you can get a whole bunch of people with the moral lack of character, so to speak, of, let's say, Casey Anthony, or even worse moral character, equal or worse than Casey Anthony, and you could prove it all day long in court. What does that have to do with a murder charge? So obviously with a murder charge, you need to spend your time proving that a particular individual murdered somebody. You need a murder scene, you need a body, you need a means of which they were murdered. You need physical evidence. Otherwise, we're just dealing with hearsay and character assassinations. If you haven't checked out the Scott Peterson case, you could check out the MINDSHOCK Scott Peterson case. That one's a lot more problematic because, of course, there was a robbery, there were other murders and dismemberments in the area, other pregnant women being kidnapped. So that's a completely separate case. In this one, it's pretty clear-cut. There's not a boatload of suspects. There's funny business going on, of course. And I think the crux of the issue in this case is, of course, people try to say, okay, well, nobody would have acted this way. Well, here's the thing, though. When you're dealing with mentally disturbed individuals, with weird people, bizarro people, this is obviously a bizarro world type of case, you're dealing with people who are not going to react normally or people that are just under such mental distress. Like, let's say for the sake of argument, Kaylee Anthony died as a result of some kind of an accident, and they were so terrified of being found negligent or whatnot that this whole thing got out of control, and stories are being concocted about nanny kidnappings and all this stuff because these people flipped out. Now, if these are not normal people to begin with, now again, I don't know any of these people personally. I'm just saying for the sake of argument. If these people are already either mentally disturbed or just abnormal in any number of ways, expecting them to act like a normal person is quite silly, and that's what seems like a lot of the judgments online and commentaries on the case are, well, they acted this way, therefore they're guilty. Not necessarily. I mean, look at Scott Peterson. Let's say, for the sake of argument, that Scott Peterson is guilty. Would that be the way that a guilty person acts? Maybe, maybe not. We have other guilty people that are faking and feigning concern and loss, sometimes convincingly. But they were still guilty. And if Scott Peterson is innocent, but someone who's of extremely low moral character, he's going to act terrible no matter what. Even if he's innocent, even if he didn't kill them, if let's say he's happy they're dead, I mean, there's so many different ways to look at it. If he is truly happy, if he really hated his family for whatever reason, if he's mentally disturbed, he's a narcissist, he's got some mental issues, or he's just, one of the worst scumbags ever, and he just didn't care that they got killed, he's going to behave in that fashion. That doesn't mean he killed them. These are two separate issues. So again, do we have an accidental death here, or do we have premeditated murder here? And that's what we're going to be attempting to decipher. So back to the breakdown here of the disappearance. According to Casey Anthony's father, George Anthony, Casey left the family's home on June 16th, 2008, taking her daughter Kaylee, who was almost 3 years old, with her, and did not return for 31 days. Casey's mother, Cindy, asked repeatedly during the month to see Kaylee, but Casey claimed that she was too busy with a work assignment in Tampa, Florida. At other times, she said Kaylee was with a nanny, who Casey identified by the name of Zenaida Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez, or at theme parks or the beach. It was eventually determined that a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez did in fact exist, but that she had never met Casey, Kaylee, or any other members of the Anthony family or any of Casey's friends. Learning that Casey's car was in a tow yard, George Anthony went to recover it. He and the yard attendant noted a strong smell coming from the trunk. Both later stated they believed the odor to be that of a decomposing body. When the trunk was opened, it contained only a bag of trash. Cindy reported Kaylee missing that day, July 15th, to the Orange County Sheriff's Office. During the same telephone call, Casey confirmed to the 911 operator that Kaylee had been missing for 31 days. Sounding distraught, Cindy said, "There is something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." Investigation. When Detective Yuri Melich of the Orange County Sheriff's Department began investigating Kaylee's disappearance, he found discrepancies in Casey's signed statement. When questioned, Casey said Kaylee had been kidnapped by Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, who she also identified as Zanny, Kaylee's nanny. Zanny the nanny? Oh man, this is rough. Although Casey had talked about her, Zanny had never been seen by Casey's family or friends, and in fact, there was no nanny. Casey also told police that she was working at Universal Studios, a lie she had been telling her parents for years. So again, we have a pathological liar here who cannot be trusted. So we can't really trust her if she says she killed her child. We can't trust her if she said she didn't kill her child. With pathological liars, you can't trust anything they say about anything. So there's really not much to be done there. You can't really use that evidence for or against. Because there's a lot of pathological liars out there that never kill anybody, and they have children, and their children grow up, and everything. I don't want to say fine, but there's a lot of pathological liars out there in society that never commit crimes, never are accused of crimes. But if they do, they would lie either way. So depending on how disturbed they are. So again, this is why the words of humans are not physical evidence. And certain disturbed mental individuals might not even consider what they're saying to be lies. They might not be intentionally deceiving. If they're that disturbed or that removed from reality, they could think that whatever they're thinking is the truth. And that truth can change moment to moment. And they might think it's still true depending on how disturbed they are. So I think it is quite silly to act as if incredibly disturbed individuals would act normally. And then when they don't, use that as evidence against them, because they wouldn't be acting normally under any circumstances. I mean, I'm sure everybody, if you have a large circle of friends and acquaintances, I'm sure there's a friend of a friend or an acquaintance of an acquaintance that someone either knows or has known in the past, if you're an adult and you've known a lot of people in your life, that was just a pathological liar. Sometimes they're nice people, and they lie about the most innocuous things. And this is what you have to keep in mind when dissecting any case. Investigators brought Casey to Universal Studios on July 16, 2008, the day after Kaylee was reported missing, and asked her to show them her office. Casey led police around for a while before admitting that she had been fired years before. So again, this goes to show the state of mind she was in. Now, what does for a while mean? Now, regardless whether that's dozens of minutes or even an hour or two, what would a more mentally put together person have done? Even if they lied about something before, at the moment you go there, I mean, would you even go there and attempt to fake it? But even if somehow you were either brought there or asked to meet there, at what moment, I mean, how long are you going to try to keep up the charade with the police when you know this could all be verified? So again, these are just things to keep in mind. Casey was first arrested on July 16, 2008, and was charged the following day with giving false statements to law enforcement, child neglect, and obstruction of a criminal investigation. The judge denied bail, saying Casey had shown, quote, woeful disregard for the welfare of her child, end quote. On July 22, 2008, after a bond hearing, the judge set the bail at $500,000. On August 21, 2008, after 1 month of incarceration, she was released from Orange County Jail after her $500,000 bond was posted by the nephew of California bail bondsman Leonard Padilla, in hopes that she would cooperate and Kaylee would be found. Interesting. On August 11th, 12th, and 13th, 2008, meter reader Roy Kronk called police about a suspicious object found in a forested area near the Anthony residence. In the first instance, he was directed by the sheriff's office to call the tip line, which he did, receiving no return call. On the second instance, he again called the sheriff's office, eventually was met by 2 police officers, and reported to them that he had seen what appeared to be a skull near a gray bag. On that occasion, the officer conducted a short search and stated he did not see anything. On December 11, 2008, Kronk again called the police. They searched and found the remains of a child in a trash bag. Investigative teams recovered duct tape, which was hanging from the hair attached to the skull and had some tissue left on the skull. Over the next 4 days, more bones were found in the wooded area near the spot where the remains initially had been discovered. On December 19, 2008, medical examiner Jan Garavaglia confirmed that the remains found were those of Kaylee Anthony. The death was ruled a homicide and the cause of death listed as undetermined. So there's a lot of obviously triggered individuals. We could call them law enforcement bootlickers, people who they don't believe in the fallibility of law enforcement in any capacity. And how many times do we see case and case again where there's either not a proper investigation or it's just botched on some level. I mean, now this isn't, again, a lot of these triggered cognitive dissonant individuals hopelessly indoctrinated into the cult of state and authority worship. They think if someone's wearing a costume or belonging to some costumed group, whether it's the police or another costumed group of individuals, that makes them infallible. It's really, really bizarre. That's not against them. Police officers are human beings, just like any other type of profession. They're not perfect. Now, their fallibility rating might be a lot higher than other professions. I mean, that might be true. Police officers and doctors don't seem to have great track records compared to, for example, pilots or other highly trained individuals. However, we have to acknowledge here that in a lot of these cases, protocol's not followed and competency is not exhibited. I mean, this guy potentially found the body here, and he's not even called back. So he has to call again. And then the officers supposedly couldn't even find what he reported. I mean, this is rough. It seems like, and especially in these high profile cases, these are just critical moments in the case. And the level of incompetency exhibited across the board is nothing short of stunning. Now, obviously, I mean, mind-shocking. Obviously, this has nothing to do with Casey Anthony's guilt or innocence, but it's really mind-shocking, the incompetency of law enforcement in certain instances. And it's just shocking. That's why it's not shocking that there's so many innocent people in prison when you have this level of incompetency with law enforcement. Obviously, training is severely lacking, particularly in the logical analysis department. It's really rough. Arrest and charges. Casey was offered a limited immunity deal on July 29, 2008 by prosecutors related to, quote, the false statements given to law enforcement about locating her child, end quote, which was renewed on August 25th to expire 28th. She did not take it. On September 5th, 2008, she was released again on bail, pending charges after being fitted with an electronic tracking device. Her $500,000 bond was posted by her parents, Cindy and George Anthony, who signed a promissory note for the bond. On October 14th, 2008, Casey Anthony was indicted by a grand jury of charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to police. She was later arrested. Judge John Jordan ordered that she be held without bond. On October 21st, 2008, the charges of child neglect were dropped against Casey, according to the state attorney's office, because, quote, as the evidence proved that the child was deceased, the state sought an indictment on the legally appropriate charges, end quote. On October 28th, Anthony was arraigned and pleaded not guilty to all charges. Now, was that a mistake? Because in a lot of, it's rough because we do not know the true cause of death. So we don't know to what extent this would have been child neglect. I mean, it's just impossible to know without knowing exactly what happened. It's definitely a possibility. It's a great possibility. And without her telling, it's always tough because in a criminal case, the burden of proof is always on the prosecution. So, and I don't know how many times I need to repeat that. There's so many triggered commenters on the Peterson case, whatever. I'm not saying any of these people are innocent. I don't know what level of English comprehension some of these commenters are. Obviously, the bulk of the MindShock audience is very logical and intelligent. That's why they listen to the podcast. It's a critical thinking podcast regarding a lot of these true crime cases where we don't fall for these logical fallacies. But it's a very basic point. The burden of proof is on the prosecution. So we could look at all this circumstantial evidence. We could look at, why would she not tell the truth if it really wasn't child neglect? And those are all very valid points. And it seems most likely this was a case of child neglect, but we really don't know because if this was an accidental death and not a murder, without knowing what type of accident it was, if it was a pool accident and she wasn't being watched, who was supposed to be watching her at the time? We'll get into theories where Cindy and George Anthony, her parents, were actually responsible, and this is not a fully functional family, and none of them want to tell the truth. And if they're all mentally disturbed, does that account for all these things? And is it possible that if the grandparents of Kaylee Anthony, so these are Casey Anthony's parents, Cindy and George, if they're responsible, and I'm not saying they are, but if they are, and she truly is innocent, but she's that disturbed and scared possibly of them. I mean, we really don't know the situation and why it would unfold this way, and that's why the burden of proof is on the prosecution. So we really don't know who is responsible. If the child is dead and it was some kind of pool drowning and it wasn't a freak accident and it was due to lack of supervision or something of that nature, I mean, that's clearly child neglect, no question, no question. Not, I mean, it could be further charges than that as well, but without knowing the exact situation and who is there and who needs to be tried, it's very difficult. On April 13th, 2009, prosecutors announced that they planned to seek the death penalty in the case. The trial evidence: 400 pieces of evidence were presented. A strand of hair was recovered from the trunk of Casey's car, which was microscopically similar to hair taken from Kaylee's hairbrush. The strand showed root branding, in which hair roots form a dark band after death, which was consistent with hair from a dead body. Now, again, who put her in the trunk if she was in the trunk? And are we trying the correct individuals here? And did Casey Anthony know about it? It seems, again, just from the outset here, it seems like Casey Anthony must know the truth regardless of what it is. Now, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's that mentally disturbed. Maybe she has memory issues. But just from the surface, it's, again, a brain fingerprint scan. I've mentioned this many times. I think it should be used. Government agencies use it. The military uses it. You cannot fool a brain fingerprint scanner. If you can, there's a $100,000 reward in it for you, which I believe nobody has collected yet. So if the information is in her brain, it's so bizarre to me. If the justice system is truly about justice, why not use the best tools available? And then, even if you want to say it can't be admitted at trial, just like a lie detector test, why not take it anyway, especially her defense team, and not disclose the results? And if the results are exculpatory towards Casey Anthony, or, she would still, unless she was found unfit, mentally unfit, or too scared if it was another party responsible, at least she would know and the information would be out there. Has justice been served regarding Kaylee Anthony? Because this is a dead child and we don't know what happened. So, yeah, there's a lot of problematic issues here. Kronk, who discovered the remains, repeated the same basic story that he had told police. On Friday, October 24, 2008, a forensic report by Arpad Vass of the Oak Ridge National Laboratory judged that results from an air sampling procedure called LIBS performed in the trunk of Casey Anthony's car showed chemical compounds, quote, consistent with a decompositional event, end quote, based on the presence of 5 key chemical compounds out of over 400 possible chemical compounds that Vass's research group considers typical of decomposition. Investigators stated that the trunk smelled strongly of human decomposition, but human decomposition was not specified on the laboratory scale. The process has not been affirmed by a Daubert test in the courts. A Daubert test refers to the Daubert standard, which is a rule of evidence regarding the admissibility of expert witness testimony. In short, they are guidelines for admitting scientific expert testimony. The main factors are determining whether or not the following criteria are met: whether the theory or technique employed by the expert is generally accepted in the scientific community, whether it has been subjected to peer review and publication, whether it can be and has been tested, whether the known or potential rate of error is acceptable, and whether the research was conducted independent of the particular litigation or dependent on an intention to provide the proposed testimony. That's an important one. In 2000, Rule 702 was amended in an attempt to codify and structure elements embodied in the Daubert trilogy. The amended rule reads as follows: if scientific, technical, or other specialized knowledge will assist the trier of fact to understand the evidence or determine a fact in issue, a witness qualified as an expert by knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education may testify thereto in the form of an opinion or otherwise if, 1, the testimony is based upon sufficient facts or data, 2, the testimony is the product of reliable principles and methods, and 3, the witness has applied the principles and methods reliably to the facts of the case. So, stating here, the process was not affirmed by a Daubert test in the courts. Okay, so what does that tell us? It's not irrefutable fact that there was a decomposing body in the trunk, but it is very possible that there was. All right, is that beyond a reasonable doubt? I would say you'd have to have another group, one or two groups, also do tests, and if they all find the same conclusion, then it would match that. But when you only have one research group that may or may not have some kind of ulterior motive or not, they might just be mistaken. That's why it's important to have more than one objective neutral group providing information. Vass's group also stated there was chloroform in the car trunk, and there's been plenty of speculation about that. We will get to that later. In October 2009, officials released 700 pages of documents related to the Anthony investigation, including records of Google searches of the terms, quote, neck breaking, end quote, and, quote, how to make chloroform, end quote, on a computer accessible to Casey, presented by the prosecutors as evidence of a crime. Yeah, that does not look good. But also, see, if it was neck breaking of a baby or something, that would be a little bit more damning. I mean, what other terms were there? Because what if she's crazy and she wanted to kill somebody else or was just looking up crazy stuff? I mean, everybody's looked up crazy stuff. I don't see that specific to the premeditated murder of a baby as opposed to just looking up crazy stuff. I don't know. I mean, but it definitely doesn't look good. It doesn't help the case. Is that beyond a reasonable doubt? I would say no, because it would also have to be proven that she was the one searching that specifically. What does a computer accessible to Casey mean? What is the total number of computers accessible to Casey? And what are other search terms on the other computers accessible to Casey? You have to see all of this information as one. But if they are attempting to prove premeditation, I mean, that's definitely a start. According to detectives, crime scene evidence included residue of a heart-shaped sticker found on duct tape over the mouth of Kaylee's skull. That is disturbing on so many levels. However, the laboratory was not able to capture a heart shape photographically after some duct tape was subject to dye testing. A blanket found at the crime scene matched Kaylee's bedding at her grandparents' home. Among photos entered into evidence was one from the computer of Ricardo Morales, an ex-boyfriend of Casey Anthony, depicting a poster with the caption, "Win her over with chloroform." Okay, that's also disturbing on many levels. So, I mean, I don't know, is the defense attempting to say that Ricardo Morales used these computers as well? And he was looking up neck breaking and chloroform, which is also disturbing. What is this guy planning to do? And was he doing that to look up, is he a potential or wannabe serial killer? And this has nothing to do with Casey and her baby. I don't know. Witness John Dennis Bradley's software developed for computer investigations was used by the prosecution to indicate that Casey had conducted extensive computer searches on the word chloroform 84 times, and to suggest that Anthony had planned to commit murder. He later discovered that a flaw in the software misread the forensic data and that the word chloroform had been searched for only one time. And the website in question offered information on the use of chloroform in the 19th century. So again, this is why on MINDSHOCK the motto is, the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. When you put blind faith in the infallibility of humans, there are problems. Because there's a big difference between searching chloroform once in some kind of historical context and saying that there were extensive computer searches of chloroform 84 times. It's just, again, that's why people should take it seriously beyond a reasonable doubt. There's a lot of innocent people sitting in prison because of because of the fallibility of humans and human technology. Attorneys and jury. The lead prosecutor in the case was Assistant State Attorney Linda Drain Burdick. Assistant State Attorneys Frank George and Jeff Ashton completed the prosecution team. Lead counsel for the defense was Jose Baez, a Florida criminal defense attorney. Attorneys J. Cheney Mason, Dorothy Clay Sims, and Ann Fennell served as co-counsel. During the trial, attorney Mark Lipman represented George and Cindy Anthony. Jury selection began May 9, 2011 at the Pinellas County Criminal Justice Center in Clearwater, Florida, because the case had been so widely reported in the Orlando area. Jurors were brought in from Pinellas County to Orlando. Jury selection took longer than expected and ended on May 20th, 2011, with 12 jurors and 5 alternates being sworn in. The panel consisted of 9 women and 8 men. The trial took 6 weeks, during which time the jury was sequestered to avoid influence from information available outside the courtroom. They should just have jurors from, I don't know, Amish communities or something where they've seen literally 0 news reports and they're not on social media, so they could be a little bit more objective, because this is just madness. Opening statements. The trial began on May 24th, 2011 at the Orange County Courthouse with Judge Belville Perry presiding. In the opening statements, lead prosecutor Linda Drain Burdick described the story of the disappearance of Caylee Anthony day by day. The prosecution alleged an intentional murder and sought the death penalty against Casey Anthony. Prosecutors stated that Anthony used chloroform to render her daughter unconscious before putting duct tape over her nose and mouth to suffocate her, and left Caylee's body in the trunk of her car for a few days before disposing of it. They characterized Anthony as a party girl who killed her daughter to free herself from parental responsibility and enjoy her personal life. The defense, led by Jose Baez, claimed in opening statements that Caylee drowned accidentally in the family's pool on June 16, 2008, and was found by George Anthony, who told Casey she would spend the rest of her life in jail for child neglect, and then proceeded to cover up Caylee's death. Baez argued that this is why Casey Anthony went on with her life and failed to report the incident for 31 days. He alleged that it was the habit of a lifetime for Casey to hide her pain and pretend nothing was wrong because she had been sexually abused by George Anthony since she was 8 years old, and her brother Lee also had made advances towards her. Baez also questioned whether Roy Kronk, the meter reader who found the bones, had actually removed them from another location, and further alleged that the police department's investigation was compromised by their desire to feed a media frenzy about a child's murder rather than a more mundane drowning. He admitted that Casey had lied. There had been a nanny named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Okay, so here we have a boatload of problems here. Well, first of all, justice needs to be served. So I didn't discuss this at the beginning, but if it was, let's say, George who was responsible and found the daughter, or was supposed to be watching her at the time, we really don't have a good time frame on that day. I mean, I'll be getting into a little bit more detail, but it's tough because if this is a highly dysfunctional family, highly disturbed, if Casey Anthony was not present when her daughter had an accident, what would George Anthony could possibly scare her to such an extent? I mean, we don't know. We're not these individuals. But if she's that disturbed, is it possible? Or if she really was responsible, she's the one that's supposed to be watching the child, and the child did an accident, if it was an accident. But again, we have so many conflicting statements. Some of her friends said she was not a party girl, and then you have these grandparents, supposedly, who want to spend time with their child. So if she wants to go out and party, she could leave them with her parents. So there's things that don't make a lot of sense. But again, with disturbed individuals, I mean, none of this really means anything one way or another, because we have cases similar to this with similar circumstances, and we have cases with other circumstances where murders occur or don't occur. So it's really neither here nor there, of course. We're not going to fall for any black and white logical fallacies. Witness testimony: prosecutors called George Anthony as their first witness, and in a response to their question, he denied having sexually abused his daughter Casey. Anthony testified he did not smell anything resembling human decomposition in Casey's car when she visited him on June 24th, but he did smell something similar to human decomposition when he picked the car up on July 15th. Cindy Anthony testified that her comments to 911 that Casey's car smelled like someone died was just a figure of speech. So I was just about to float the theory that perhaps Cindy Anthony had no knowledge of what happened to Kaylee, because if it was, for example, George, who was supposed to be watching her, she had an accident, he got scared, he doesn't want to be held responsible for that, he wanted to blame Casey, or Casey was responsible and she got scared regardless, and Cindy was not in the know. Is it possible she's still not in the know and she just said it was a figure of speech to downplay now that she realized the severity of the situation? Or, I mean, conversely, I guess theoretically it's possible that Cindy was the one who was supposed to be watching Kaylee at the moment when the accident occurred. Who knows? Again, without knowing exactly what happened that day, it's impossible to know. But again, dissecting these individuals' actions are kind of problematic. If they're a highly dysfunctional, not normal family and not normal individuals, normal rules don't apply. So that doesn't really help us too much in determining exactly what happened. Baez asked an FBI analyst about the paternity test the FBI conducted to see if Lee was Kaylee's father. She told the jury the test came back negative. Regarding a photo on the computer of Ricardo Morales, an ex-boyfriend of Casey Anthony, depicting a poster with the caption, "Win her over with chloroform," Morales said that the photo was on his MySpace page and that he had never discussed chloroform with Anthony or searched for chloroform on her computer. But he could be lying as well, of course. Someone who searches chloroform and has posters that say "Win her over with chloroform" probably shouldn't be trusted. The prosecution called John Dennis Bradley, a former Canadian law enforcement officer who develops software for computer investigations, to analyze a data file from a desktop taken from the Anthony home. Bradley said he was able to use a program to recover deleted searches from March 17th and March 21st, 2008, and that someone searched the website SciSpot.com for chloroform 84 times. Bradley expressed his belief that some of these items might have been bookmarked. Under cross-examination by the defense, Bradley agreed that there were 2 individual accounts on the desktop and there was no way to know who actually performed the searches. Again, was this the ex-boyfriend? We don't know. Police dog handler Jason Forgy testified that Garrus, a German Shepherd cadaver dog certified in 2005, indicated a high alert of human decomposition in the trunk of Casey's car, saying the police dog had real-world searches numbering, quote, over 3,000 by now, end quote. During cross-examination, Baez argued that the dog's search records were hearsay. I mean, how hard is this to verify, though? Sergeant Kristen Brewer also testified that her police dog, Bones, signaled decomposition in the backyard during a search in July 2008. However, neither police dog was able to detect decomposition during a second visit to the Anthony home. Brewer explained that this was because whatever had been in the yard was either moved or the odor dissipated. What a genius. The prosecutor called Chief Medical Examiner Jan Garavaglia, who testified that she determined Kaylee's manner of death to be homicide, but listed it as, quote, death by undetermined means, end quote. Garavaglia took into account the physical evidence present on the remains she examined, as well as the available information on the way they were found and what she had been told by the authorities before arriving at her determination. We know by our observations that it's a red flag when a child has not been reported to authorities with injury. There's foul play, Garavaglia said. Now again, that's with normal people, right? Are we dealing with normal people with this Anthony family? Okay, back to Garavaglia's statement. There is no child that should have duct tape on the lower part of its face when it dies. Additionally, Garavaglia addressed the chloroform evidence found by investigators inside the trunk of Casey's car, testifying that even a small amount of chloroform would be sufficient to cause the death of a child. Okay, now I wonder how much the ex-boyfriend was looked into, because if this ex-boyfriend is some kind of date rapist or something, and he routinely uses chloroform, if he was with Casey Anthony, maybe he stored chloroform in the trunk, and it might have nothing to do with Kaylee. Now, another point here is there should be no reason that a child has duct tape on the lower part of its face when it's found. Yes, absolutely. However, if you have panicked individuals, like let's say again, just for the sake of argument that it truly was an accidental death, again, people are negligent, no doubt, and should be prosecuted and tried for that if they were negligent. However, if they were really spooked, when you have mentally disturbed individuals, is it possible she wanted to set it up to make it look like there was a kidnapper and they kidnapped the child, duct taped the mouth, and then killed it to cover up the accident and try to blame it on somebody else? Now, a regular person probably wouldn't go through such lengths, but an extremely disturbed individual might. But does that mean they premeditated the murder of a child? I mean, can you prove that beyond a reasonable doubt? University of Florida professor and human identification laboratory director Michael Warren was brought on by the prosecution to present a computer animation of the way duct tape could have been used in the death of the child, which the defense objected to hearing. Judge Perry, after a short recess to review, ruled that the video could be shown to the jury. The animation featured a picture of Kaylee taken alongside Casey, superimposed with an image of Kaylee's decomposed skull, and another with a strip of duct tape that was recovered with her remains. The images were slowly brought together, showing that the duct tape could have covered her nose and mouth. Bays stated, "The disgusting superposition is nothing more than a fantasy. They're throwing things against the wall and seeing if it sticks." Jurors were seen taking notes of the imagery, and Warren testified that it was his opinion that the duct tape found with Kaylee's skull was placed there before her body began decomposing. FBI Latin print examiner Elizabeth Fontaine testified that adhesive in the shape of a heart was found on a corner piece of a duct tape that was covering the mouth portion of Kaylee's remains during ultraviolet testing. Fontaine examined 3 pieces of duct tape found on Kaylee's remains for fingerprints and said she could not find fingerprints but did not expect to, given the months the tape and the remains had been outdoors and exposed to the elements, stressing that any oil or sweat from a person's fingertips would have long since deteriorated. Although Fontaine showed the findings to her supervisor, she did not initially try to photograph the heart-shaped adhesive, explaining, quote, "When I observe something is unexpected, I note it and continue with my examination," end quote. During the defense's cross-examination, Fontaine explained that when she examined the sticker evidence a second time, after subjecting the tape to dye testing, quote, "it was no longer visible," end quote. She said that other FBI agents had tested the duct tape in the interim. The defense called 2 government witnesses who countered prosecution witness testimony about the duct tape. The chief investigator for the medical examiner stated that the original placement of the duct tape was unclear, and it could have shifted positions as he collected the remains. Cindy Anthony testified that their family buried their pets in blankets and plastic bags using duct tape to seal the opening. Additionally, an FBI forensics document examiner found no evidence of a sticker or sticker residue on the duct tape found near the child's remains. The defense called forensic pathologist Dr. Werner Spitz, who performed a second autopsy on Kaylee after Garavaglia, and challenged Garavaglia's autopsy report. He called her autopsy shoddy, saying it was a failure that Kaylee's skull was not opened during her examination. "You need to examine the whole body in an autopsy," he said. Spitz said that he was not allowed to attend Garavaglia's initial autopsy on Kaylee's remains, and that from his own follow-up autopsy, he was not comfortable ruling the child's death a homicide. He said he could not determine what Kaylee's manner of death was, but said that there was no indication to him that she was murdered. Additionally, Spitz testified that he believed the duct tape found on Kaylee's skull was placed there after the body decomposed, opining that if tape was placed on the skin, there should have been DNA left on it, and suggested that someone may have staged some of the crime scene photos. "The person who took this picture, the person who prepared this, put the hair there," stated Spitz. When asked by Ashton during cross-examination, So your testimony is the medical examiner's personnel took the hair that wasn't on the skull and placed it there. Spitz answered, "It wouldn't be the first time, sir. I can tell you some horror stories about that." And Werner Spitz is, of course, a high-profile forensic pathologist. Some people believe that he was involved in conspiracies, but he was involved in the investigations of John F. Kennedy's assassination, Martin Luther King, and also testified in the O.J. Simpson trial and consulted on the investigation of JonBenet Ramsey. On June 21st, Bradley discovered that a flaw in his software misread the forensic data and that the word chloroform had been searched for only one time, and that the website in question offered information on the use of chloroform in the 19th century. On June 28th, Bays called Cindy Anthony to the stand, who told jurors she had been the one who performed the chloroform search on the family computer in March 2008. The plot thickens. Is she lying about that to cover? Or is it true? The prosecution alleged that only Casey could have conducted this search and others because she was the only one at home at the time. When asked by prosecutors how she could have made the internet searches when employment records show she was at work, Casey Anthony said despite what her work timesheet indicates, she was at home during these time periods because she left from work early during the days in question. So again, if she has a record of leaving work early and we can't verify her whereabouts 100%, what does that mean? Bradley alerted prosecutor Linda Burdick and Sergeant Kevin Stanger of the sheriff's office the weekend of June 25th about the discrepancy in his software and volunteered to fly to Orlando at his own expense to show them. On the same day, the judge temporarily halted proceedings when the defense filed a motion to determine if Anthony was competent to proceed with trial. The motion states the defense received a privileged communication from their client which caused them to believe Miss Anthony is not competent to aid and assist in her own defense. The trial resumed on June 27th when the judge announced the results of the psychological evaluations showed Anthony was competent to proceed. Later, in testimony about air samples, Dr. Ken Furton, a professor of chemistry at Florida International University, stated there is no consensus in the field on what chemicals are typical of human decomposition. Judge Perry ruled that the jury would not get to smell air samples taken from the trunk. That's creepy on a lot of levels. The prosecution stated they discussed Bradley's software discrepancy with Bays on June 27th, and he raised the issue in court testimony. Bays also asked Judge Perry to instruct the jury about this search information, but prosecutors disputed this, and it was not done. See, I still don't really understand what all the hoopla is about searches. Like, how many people search for how to kill somebody and never kill somebody? I mean, obviously it's a disturbing thing to do, or ways to kill somebody, but what if they're what if they watched a true crime documentary and they looked up the search terms, but they weren't actually looking to do it. They were just seeing what could be done. It's really bizarre to link what someone is. I mean, if it's super, super specific and you can prove that that person was the one at the computer, I mean, that's a little different, but just in general, this is not beyond a reasonable doubt in any way. It's really bizarre, especially when it's the chloroform. I mean, it's just, even if there was a plan, I mean, there's a difference between a conspiracy to commit murder or a plan to commit murder and actually doing it. Because again, just for the sake of argument, let's say she really did want to kill her baby, but there was an accident before she could. I mean, there's so many infinite situations that we don't know about. Pretending to know is quite silly when the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, obviously, someone is responsible for that child and that child's death, and they need to be held accountable. But who that is, we don't know from the information available. We need some brain fingerprint scanning on all of these individuals. Also on June 27th, the defense called 2 private investigators who in November 2008 had searched the area where the body was later found. The search was videotaped, but nothing was found. On June 28th, the defense called a Texas EquiSearch team leader who did 2 searches of the area and found no body. The defense then called Roy Kronk, who recounted the same basic story he told police about his discovery of Caylee Anthony's remains in December 2008. He acknowledged receiving $5,000 after the remains were identified, but denied that he told his son that finding the body would make him rich and famous. The next day, his son testified he had made such statements. Okay. All right. Why are there so many issues with some of these high-profile cases? It's really bizarre because we do not have a clear-cut case here. There's clearly some funny business over the remains. The body's there, the police search, they videotape the search, there's no body there. Then the body's there magically later. Like, what are we missing here? This is a problem. Is it also possible someone nearby snatched Kaylee and they were so terrified that they would be blamed for negligence because maybe they thought, if I don't know, she crawled into the road and got hit by a car, or into the woods and got lost and died. If they thought, I don't know what they were thinking. What does a mentally disturbed individual, if they're not normal, I'm not saying they are or they are not, if they are a disturbed family, not normal family, what are they going to think if the child is just randomly missing? They're going to think they're going to be accused of something? So, who knows? We really don't know. But if there was someone else responsible or someone else involved, it's really disturbing how the body wasn't found and this Roy Kronk individual. It doesn't add up. I'm not a coincidence theorist. They're an anomaly theorist where it's just, nothing to see here. It's an anomaly. It doesn't mean anything. Just write it off. I don't think anything should be written off. If you're really after the truth, you have to examine every detail because you don't know what it means if you don't know what happened. On June 30th, the defense called Crystal Holloway, a volunteer in the search for Kaylee, who stated that she had an affair with George Anthony, that he had been to her home, and that he had texted her, quote, "Just thinking about you, I need you in my life," end quote. She told the defense that George Anthony had told her that Kaylee's death was, quote, "an accident that snowballed out of control," end quote. Under cross-examination by prosecutors, they pointed to her sworn police statement in which she had said that George Anthony believed it was an accident rather than knowing it was. In her initial report, Holloway reported George Anthony as saying, quote, "I really believe that it was an accident that just went wrong and Casey Anthony tried to cover it up," end quote. She said he had not told her he was present when the alleged accident occurred. During redirect examination, Bays asked Holloway if George Anthony had told her that Kaylee was dead while stating publicly that she was missing, to which she replied yes. So he had told her these things, and yet the two of them went on volunteer searches for Kaylee. In his earlier testimony, George Anthony denied the affair with Holloway and said he visited her only because she was ill. He said he sent the text message because he needed everyone who had helped in his life. So how many other people got text messages? After Holloway's testimony, Judge Perry told jurors that it could be used to impeach George Anthony's credibility, but that it was not proof of how Kaylee died nor evidence of Casey Anthony's guilt or innocence. The prosecution rested its case on June 15 after calling 59 witnesses for 70 different testimonies. The defense rested its case on June 30th after calling 47 witnesses for 63 different testimonies. Casey Anthony did not testify. On June 30th and July 1st, the prosecutor presented rebuttal arguments, beginning by showing the jury photographs of Kaylee's clothes and George's suicide note. It called two representatives of Cindy Anthony's former employer, who explained why their computer login system shows Cindy was at work the afternoon she said she went home early, and searched her computer for information about chloroform. Is that normal for grandmas to just go home and search their computers for chloroform? A police computer analyst testified someone had purposely searched online for, quote, neck plus breaking, end quote. Another analyst testified she did not find evidence that Cindy Anthony had searched certain terms she claimed to have searched. Anthropology professor Dr. Michael Warren from the University of Florida was recalled to rebut a defense witness on the need to open a skull during an autopsy. The lead detective stated that there were no phone calls between Cindy and George Anthony during the week of June 16, 2008. However, he told the defense he did not know that George had a second cell phone. Again, why is nothing simple in this case? It's just so weird how there's all this other funny business going on. Second cell phones, uncorroborated time activity of people supposedly at work. So he didn't talk to his wife for a whole week, or there were no phone calls for the whole week on one of his cell phones. It's rough. Closing arguments were heard July 3rd and July 4th. Jeff Ashton for the prosecution. They have this case on July 4th? The court is open on July 4th? Huh. Jeff Ashton for the prosecution told the jury, when you have a child, that child becomes your life. This case is about the clash between that responsibility and the expectations that go with it, and the life that Casey Anthony wanted to have. He outlined the state's case against Casey, touching on her many lies to her parents and others, the smell in her car's trunk identified by several witnesses, including her own father, as the odor from human decomposition, and the items found with Kaylee's skeletal remains in December 2008. He emphasized how Casey maintains her lies until they absolutely cannot be maintained anymore, and then replaces them with another lie, using Zanny the nanny as an example. Anthony repeatedly told police that Kaylee was with the nanny that she specifically identified as Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez. Police, however, were never able to find the nanny. Authorities did find a woman named Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, but she denied ever meeting with the Anthonys. Ashton reintroduced the items found with Kaylee's remains, including a Winnie the Pooh blanket that matched the bedding at her grandparents' home, one of a set of laundry bags with a twin bag found at the Anthony home, and duct tape he said was a relatively rare brand. That bag is Kaylee's coffin, Ashton said, holding up a photograph of the laundry bag as Casey reacted with emotion. He further criticized the defense theory that Kaylee drowned in the Anthony pool and that Casey and George panicked upon finding the child's body and covered up her death. He advised jurors to use their common sense when deciding on a verdict. Quote, "No one makes an accident look like a murder," end quote, he said. Well, it depends on how freaked out they are, right? It depends on whether they're normal or not. Nobody thinking clearly would probably do that, but if they were terrified for their life and they were trying to pin it on somebody else, which is, of course, that's a crime as well, but that's a different crime. Before closing arguments, Judge Perry ruled that the defense could argue that a drowning occurred due to reasonable conclusions aided by witness testimony, but that arguing sexual abuse was not allowed since there was nothing to support the claim that George sexually abused Casey. Bays began by contending that there were holes in the prosecution's forensic evidence, saying it was based on a fantasy. He told the jury that the prosecution wanted them to see stains and insects that did not really exist, and that they had not proven that the stains in Anthony's car trunk were caused by Kaylee's decomposing body rather than from a trash bag found there. He added that the prosecutors tried to make his client look like a promiscuous liar because their evidence was weak. He said the drowning is the only explanation that makes sense and showed jurors a photograph of Kaylee opening the home's sliding glass door by herself. He stressed that there were no child safety locks in the home and that both of Casey's parents, George and Cindy, testified that Kaylee could get out of the house easily. Although Cindy testified that Kaylee could not put the ladder on the side of the pool and climb up, Bays alleged that Cindy may have left the ladder up the night before. She didn't admit to doing so in testimony, he said, but how much guilt would she have knowing it was her that left the ladder up that day? Defense attorney Jose Baez told jurors his biggest fear was that they would base their verdict on emotions, not evidence. The strategy behind that is if you hate her, if you think she's a lying, no good slut, then you'll start to look at the evidence in a different light, he said. I told you at the very beginning of this case that this was an accident that snowballed out of control. What made it unique is not what happened, but who it happened to. He explained Casey Anthony's behavior as being the result of her dysfunctional family situation. At one point, as Baez spoke, Ashton could be seen smiling or chuckling behind his hand. This prompted Baez to refer to him as this laughing guy right there. The judge called a sidebar conference, then a recess. When court resumed, he chastised both sides, saying both Ashton and Baez had violated his order that neither side should make disparaging remarks about opposing counsel. After both attorneys apologized, the judge accepted the apologies but warned that a recurrence would have the offending attorney excluded from the courtroom. Defense attorney Cheney Mason then followed with an additional closing argument, addressing the jury to discuss the charges against Casey Anthony. The burden rests on the shoulders of my colleagues at the state attorney's office, Mason said, referring to proving that Casey Anthony committed a crime. Mason said that the jurors are required, whether they like it or not, to find the defendant not guilty if the state did not adequately prove its case against Casey Anthony. Mason emphasized that the burden of proof is on the state and that Casey Anthony's decision not to testify is not an implication of guilt. Now, just as an exercise, again, because this is MINDSHOCK, we go down every single rabbit hole, every single theory. Put yourself in the shoes of Casey Anthony. Now, let's say, for the sake of argument, regardless of whether she was sexually abused by her father or not, whether or not, how disturbed she is, let's say she's relatively normal, I don't know. You discover that if your own mother or father left a pool ladder up and your daughter somehow got out of the house because there's no... Now, again, who does the burden fall to regarding the child proofing in the house? I mean, it's all three of them, I guess, especially unless Casey Anthony really is that mentally unfit, but supposedly a certain number of psychologists found her mentally fit to stand trial, which means if she's not that insane that she can have a child and she can take care of it, then it is her responsibility as well as the grandparents to have the home child-proofed, right? I mean, they're all caring for the child at different times. You need to child-proof the home. So if you're Casey Anthony and you discover, maybe she discovered the body, maybe she didn't. I mean, is it possible that if it was George that discovered the body, he could have concocted whatever story? Especially if he knew that it was his own wife that left the ladder up and was technically... I mean, I don't know. Who's responsible in that situation? If Cindy left the ladder up and the home's not childproof, they're all responsible, basically. But Casey Anthony was technically the only one on trial there. But if you're Casey Anthony, you discover that, you're probably... I mean, what are you thinking? I mean, that's enough to have a psychotic break, isn't it? Your own child is dead. Possibly because of irresponsible actions, yours as well, but your parents, your own, maybe your own mother. Who knows? I mean, that's got to be insane. You would leave the house, never speak to them again? Maybe. We really don't know what happened. And if they're guilty, maybe they would try to cover for her, as George and Cindy did. Cindy, maybe she didn't make the searches, but she pretended to. And again, we really don't know if Kaylee Anthony, if she's got some crazy ex-boyfriend or boyfriend who... I don't know what he's doing with chloroform. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe she was, for the sake of argument, we could say maybe she was planning to kill her kid, but she really didn't want to. And once the kid was gone, I'm sure once she was gone, it's very possible. It's like people who attempt to commit suicide on a failed suicide. Now they want to live because they realize what they almost lost. Is it possible maybe she was planning? Maybe that accounts for some of the variables. If she was planning to kill her child, or at least considering it, and then she finds her child dead because of the irresponsibility of her own mother or possibly father or both. And now she didn't want, now maybe she really thinks how stupid she was. Now she might feel incredibly guilty for even thinking it. And then also now her child is gone. Would that explain her actions? So what if that scenario is true, then obviously George and Cindy need to be put on trial here. Lead prosecutor Linda Drain Burdick, in the prosecution rebuttal, told the jurors that she and her colleagues backed up every claim they made. in their opening statement 6 weeks ago and implied that the defense never directly backed up their own opening statement claims. My biggest fear is that common sense will be lost in all the rhetoric of the case, she said, insisting that she would never ask the jury to make their decision based on emotion, but rather the evidence. Responses to guilt are oh so predictable, she said. What do guilty people do? They lie, they avoid, they run, they mislead, they divert attention away from themselves, and they act like nothing is wrong. Possibly if they're relatively normal and they commit a crime. Normal in other ways, obviously not normal, and I don't think a normal person would kill their child, but a guilty person with average sensibilities for a guilty person. Now, would Casey Anthony here, especially, let's say, we don't know what could have happened, but let's say if Cindy was responsible and George didn't want that to come out, could he possibly have even threatened Casey Anthony's life? And that caused her to flee being scared. And then she couldn't tell the real truth, so she made up the nanny story because she's already a pathological liar. She's mentally disturbed. I mean, there's so many different scenarios that this could unfold where Casey Anthony is relatively innocent, other than, of course, allowing herself and her child to be in a non-child-proof home. But there's so many other scenarios here if we're going beyond a reasonable doubt. I mean, just that, looking at all of this information again, logically and objectively, it seems like it's very possible that a ladder could have been left up in the pool. And if it's admitted that Kaylee can get in and out of the house by herself since it's not childproof, that's damning. That's damning on a lot of levels, and all three of them are responsible for that. She suggested that the garbage bag in the trunk of the car was a decoy, put there to keep people from getting suspicious about the smell of the car when she left it abandoned in a parking stall directly beside a dumpster in an Amscot parking lot. Whose life was better without Kaylee, she asked, stressing how George and Cindy Anthony were wondering where their daughter and granddaughter were in June and July 2008, the same time Casey was staying at her boyfriend's apartment, while Kaylee's body was decomposing in the woods. That's the only question you need to answer in considering why Kaylee Marie Anthony was left on the side of the road dead. Burdick then showed the jury a split screen with a photo of Casey partying at a nightclub on one side and a close-up of the Bella Vita, meaning beautiful life tattoo that she got weeks after Kaylee died on the other. Yeah, that does not look good either. Is it possible that George, again, none of these people seem to be all that normal. If George was responsible, but he somehow was helping Casey get rid of the body, and then Casey snapped at some point in the middle. I don't know. Is that possible? And then we still have this, how the body was discovered that's a big problem. That's a big problem. That's another wrench. And maybe Casey was guilty. Maybe she killed her daughter. There seem to be a lot of unanswered questions. Even if that's true, there's a lot of unanswered questions here. And when you want to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt, that needs to be proved. And we have a lot of holes here all across the board, regardless of who did what. The jury began deliberations on July 4th. On July 5th, prosecutors stated that during deliberations, they were about to give the jury the corrected information with regards to Bradley's software discrepancy. However, the jury reached a verdict before they could do so. One legal analyst stated that if the jury had found Casey guilty before receiving the exculpatory evidence, the prosecution's failure to fully disclose it could have been grounds for a mistrial. Verdict and sentence. On July 5th, 2011, the jury found Casey not guilty of counts 1 through 3 regarding first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and aggravated child abuse, while finding her guilty on counts 4 through 7 for providing false information to law enforcement. Count 4, she said she was employed at Universal Studios during 2008 pursuant to the investigation of a missing persons report. Count 5, Anthony said she had left Kaylee at an apartment complex with a babysitter, causing law enforcement to pursue the missing babysitter. Count 6, Anthony said she informed 2 employees of Universal Studios, Jeff Hopkins and Juliette Lewis at Universal, of the disappearance of Kaylee. Count 7, Anthony said she had received a phone call and spoke to Kaylee on July 15, 2008, causing law enforcement to expend further resources. I do have to question, though, is it a crime to not have a child-proofed home? I don't know. That's gets a little dicey because I mean, if you're supervising the child, I mean, can anybody supervise the child 24/7 every second? I don't know. On July 7, 2011, sentencing arguments were heard. The defense asked for the sentencing to be based on one count of lying on the grounds that the offenses occurred as part of a single interview with police dealing with the same matter, the disappearance of her daughter, as one continuous lie. The defense also argued for concurrent sentences, that is, for all four counts to become one count and the sentence to run together as one. The judge disagreed with the defense arguments, finding that Anthony's statements consisted of four distinct separate lies, ordered the sentences to be served consecutively, noting that law enforcement expended a great deal of time, energy, and manpower looking for Kaylee Marie Anthony. This search went on from July through December, over several months trying to find Kaylee Marie Anthony. Judge Perry sentenced Casey to 1 year in the county jail and $1,000 in fines for each of the four counts of providing false information to a law enforcement officer, the maximum penalty prescribed by law. She received 1,043 days of credit for time served, plus additional credit for good behavior, resulting in her release July 17th, 2011. In September 2011, Perry, complying with a Florida statute requiring judges to assess investigative and prosecution costs if requested by a state agency, ruled that Anthony must pay $217,000 to the state of Florida. He ruled she had to pay those costs directly related to lying to law enforcement about the death of Kaylee, including search costs, only up to September 30th, 2008, when the sheriff's office stopped investigating a missing child case. In earlier arguments, Mason had called the prosecutor's attempts to exact the larger sum sour grapes because the prosecution lost its case. He told reporters that Anthony is indigent. In January 2013, a Florida appeals court reduced her convictions from 4 to 2 counts. Her attorney had argued that her false statements constituted a single offense. However, the appeals court noted she gave information during 2 separate police interviews several hours apart. And that is what it means to deal in the realm of lawyers. All right, so this is, of course, episode 1, Bizarro World, because that seems like what this is, because of all of this just madness in the case. I'm going to have to do a couple of follow-up episodes because there's a lot I didn't get to. But I'm just going to close this out with this article from the Denver Post, March 2nd, 2017. Judge says Casey Anthony may have accidentally killed daughter. This article is by Mike Schneider. Orlando, Florida. The judge who presided over the acquittal of Casey Anthony in a murder trial televised live around the world said Thursday that an accidental killing is the most logical explanation for her 2-year-old daughter's death. Former Judge Belvin Perry Jr. told the Associated Press that the theory that makes the most sense to him now, based on the evidence presented at trial in 2011, is that Anthony accidentally used too much chloroform while trying to quiet Kaylee and the infant died. You have a child that can become cranky, that you want to go to sleep. That is a simple way to do it, said Perry, who is now in private practice. What we tend to forget is chloroform was used to render people unconscious long before we had anesthesia. Asked to respond on Thursday, one of her attorneys, Cheney Mason, said, "I've got your response." She was acquitted. Anthony, now 30, was acquitted of first-degree murder and convicted of misdemeanor counts of lying to law enforcement after defense attorney Jose Baez told jurors that the toddler accidentally drowned in the family pool. Prosecutors said Anthony used chloroform and then suffocated the child by putting duct tape over her mouth. The toddler's remains were found 5 months after she disappeared in a wooded area not far from where the Anthonys lived. Authorities were never able to establish a cause of death. I'm disturbed that Mr. Perry would once again go to the press with his thoughts about the case. There's no reason for him to do that, Mason said. I don't know what motivated Mr. Perry to do this or why. All I can say is everybody's entitled to an opinion. Florida's Code of Judicial Conduct prohibits judges from making public comments about any pending cases, but it says nothing about former judges talking about cases that are over. Perry said the case came up this week only because he was asked about it by a reporter from a community newspaper who was interviewing him from an unrelated story. Other local media then made inquiries about his theory. Perry said the chloroform theory is one of several regarding Kaylee's death he has been examining since he began reviewing trial transcript at the time of last summer's 5th anniversary of the trial. You can't say what happened because you weren't there. but you can talk about the probabilities, Perry said. Then you can assign whatever weight you want to a theory and ask yourself what is more logical. So yeah, a lot of unanswered questions here, and a lot of people really do believe that George Anthony knew a lot more than he said. And that is, of course, problematic because we don't have all the pieces here. But yeah, this is one of the most famous true crime cases, and there's more missing pieces than at first appear, particularly pertaining to the body not being found where it was eventually found, and even that search was videotaped as well, which we don't always have that. In other cases where bodies are found where they were previously searched, you don't necessarily have a videotape of the search showing the body not there. So that kind of funny business, I mean, it's definitely weird. It's definitely weird. But we'll have to examine more issues and more theories in the next episode. Hope you guys enjoyed another edition of the MINDSHOCK podcast. If you like the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications. You could also just go to youtube.com/MindShock to manually look at all of our podcast series, true crime and otherwise. You could also check us out Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic, logical analyses, co-podcaster requests. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And if you like this particular podcast, hit the like button, share it on social media platforms. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.